In the spring of 1775, the world's most powerful nation, an empire stretching from India to the Caribbean, was drawn into a war it never expected. And it wasn't just a war for land, it was a war for meaning, for identity, for the very idea of what a nation could be. Britain had trained armies, professional officers, and a global economy. The Americans had slogans, scattered militias, and borrowed powder. One side believed in order, the other believed in the impossible. By all calculations, the rebellion should have ended quickly. A crackdown, a hanging or two, then business as usual. That's how it worked elsewhere in the empire, but not here. Because here, something deeper was burning. The revolution didn't begin in Philadelphia, or Boston, or on a battlefield. It began in the minds of people who felt invisible, taxed without consent, governed without voice. Colonists who had once been proud to be British subjects, now questioning what that meant. It was an idea so dangerous it frightened even its believers, that government was a contract, not a divine right. That power came from the governed, not from kings. And as that idea spread, muskets followed. The first shots came not from regular armies, but from neighbors. In Lexington and Concord, men who knew each other opened fire across town squares. In the chaos, no one knew who fired first. But the moment the smoke cleared, the world had changed. Still, few expected the war to last. Even George Washington, when handed command of the Continental Army, quietly doubted they could win. He took the job anyway. Across the ocean, Parliament scoffed. "They'll come crawling back," some said. "We'll hang their leaders and be done by Christmas." They sent thousands of redcoats, flanked by loyalists and Hessian mercenaries. The empire would teach its children obedience. But the war didn't obey rules, not in the forests of New York or the icy banks of the Delaware. Not at Saratoga, where a stunning American victory caught Europe's attention. And not at Valley Forge, where an army half-starved, half-naked, some wrapped in rags and frostbite, refused to break. This wasn't a war of quick battles and glorious victories. It was a war of attrition, of endurance. A war in which the winners often lost the most, and where victory never felt secure. By the end, more than 25,000 Americans would die. Almost 1 in every 50 people in the colonies. Cities burned. Families were torn apart. The country they fought for didn't even exist yet. But through the fire, something did form. A new identity, not just independence from Britain, but dependence on each other. 13 quarrelsome colonies would have to become one nation, or fade into chaos. This was America's first war, and it nearly destroyed everything. But it also forced Americans to define what they were willing to risk everything for. Not land, not just liberty, but an idea. An idea that power belonged to the people, that freedom wasn't given, it was earned, and that even an underdog, if it believed deeply enough, could punch through the walls of empire. The war didn't just win independence, it made the United States. But at what cost? And what kind of nation did it really create? That answer would only come with blood, betrayal, and brutal lessons in unity. Because in the end, the American Revolution wasn't just a war for independence. It was a crucible, and from its heat, a nation was born. Before it was a war, it was a tension. A feeling, thick in the air, that something was breaking. The 13 colonies were not United States, not yet. They were different peoples, different economies, and different loyalties. Georgia had more in common with Barbados than with Massachusetts. New York was a bustling port. South Carolina was a plantation stronghold. The only thing that tied them together was their relationship with a mother country 3,000 miles away, an ocean and a kingdom apart. To Britain, the colonies were assets. They fed the empire with timber, tobacco, fur, and fish. They were growing fast, home to over 2 million people by 1770, more than any other European colony on Earth. But growth came with questions. Who gets to rule? Who pays? And how far could British power stretch before something snapped? The fuse was slow to light. For decades, colonists considered themselves loyal Englishmen. They drank English tea, read English newspapers, and defended the empire in wars, like the brutal French and Indian War just years earlier. Many bled for Britain, and yet, after that war ended, something shifted. To recoup war costs, Parliament introduced new taxes. The Sugar Act. the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, all designed to raise revenue from the colonies without asking their consent. Britain saw it as fair. The colonies had to pay their share. But in the towns and taverns of Boston and Philadelphia, another idea took hold. No taxation without representation. The phrase spread like wildfire, first as a protest, then as a creed. What had begun as a financial dispute began to harden into something deeper. The colonists weren't just resisting taxes, they were resisting control. Still, most people didn't want war. Even the radicals hoped for reconciliation. They wrote petitions, held congresses, argued in polite terms. But Britain didn't see this as debate. It saw insubordination, and it responded with force. Troops arrived in Boston, redcoats patrolled the streets. In 1770, a protest turned deadly, the Boston Massacre. 5 colonists lay dead. It was a minor skirmish militarily, but a major explosion emotionally. Paul Revere's engraving of the scene turned it into a national outrage. 3 years later, more unrest, a protest disguised as a party. Patriots disguised as Mohawk Indians boarded a ship and dumped hundreds of chests of tea into the harbor. The Boston Tea Party shocked the empire. Britain cracked down hard, closed Boston's port, stripped away Massachusetts's government. These were the intolerable acts, and they weren't just punishment. They were a message: obey or else. The colonies answered with defiance, not yet rebellion, but a refusal to back down. Committees of correspondence were formed, linking towns and ideas. Newspapers carried the fever from New England to the Carolinas. And in 1774, the First Continental Congress met, not to declare war, but to declare unity. They didn't call for independence, not yet, but they made one thing clear: they would stand together. Meanwhile, Britain believed the trouble was small, loud but limited. Loyalist colonists still outnumbered revolutionaries in many areas. Surely a show of force would end the noise. So, General Thomas Gage, military governor of Massachusetts, received orders to seize weapons in Concord, quietly, quickly, without bloodshed. Instead, on April 19, 1775, his troops met armed colonists at Lexington Green. No one knows who fired the first shot. But that shot was everything. It turned protest into war, grievance into revolution. In that moment, America stopped asking for rights and started fighting for them. Still, independence wasn't yet the goal. Most still hoped for peace, a return to normal. Even George Washington, newly appointed to lead the Colonial Army, saw his role as a protector, not yet a liberator. But the forces had been set in motion. This wasn't just a clash over policy. It was a cultural collision. Britain ruled by hierarchy, tradition, and empire. The colonies, though flawed and fractured, were beginning to imagine a new kind of society, one built on consent, not crown. The war that was coming wouldn't just test their muskets, it would test whether ordinary people, divided by region, race, religion, and interest, could come together to form something new. A republic, a nation, an idea. And in the months ahead, that test would begin with blood. Dawn breaks cold and gray over Lexington, Massachusetts, April 19, 1775. Thick fog clings to the fields. The grass is wet. The silence is heavier than the mist. 77 colonial militiamen stand in formation on the town green. Farmers, blacksmiths, cobblers, most with no formal training, some barely older than boys. Many haven't fired their muskets in weeks. Across the road, more than 700 redcoats approach. British regulars, well-drilled, well-armed, and under orders. Their mission is to march to Concord and seize a stockpile of colonial weapons. But in Lexington, they encounter resistance, not organized, not defiant, but present. Captain John Parker leads the Americans. He knows they're outmatched. His order is clear. Don't fire unless fired upon. But if they want a war, let it begin here. Tension crackles through the air. Then, a shot. No one knows who fired it. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it came from the trees. Maybe no one ever meant to start a war. But the sound pierces the mist and triggers chaos. The British open fire, the colonials scatter, musket balls tear through the smoke. 8 Americans lie dead. Others flee through backyards and across fences. It's not a battle, it's a blur. When the smoke clears, blood stains the green. The British march on. Hours later, at Concord's North Bridge, colonial militias will return fire, this time with numbers, this time with coordination. British forces retreat under constant ambush. Colonial gunfire rains from trees, walls, and rooftops. It's not European warfare. It's something wilder. Guerrilla, personal. By nightfall, nearly 100 colonists and 270 British soldiers are dead, wounded, or missing. The war has begun, and no one, not the king, not Parliament, not the colonists themselves, fully understands what's been unleashed. General Thomas Gage sits at his desk in Boston, a man of order, caution, and deep loyalty to the crown. He doesn't want bloodshed. He wants control. But after years of mounting unrest, patience is wearing thin in London. To Gage, the colonies are like a boiling pot. Dangerous if ignored, but potentially explosive if stirred too hard. Yet, his orders are clear. Suppress the rebellion before it spreads, seize the arms, capture the ringleaders. It's a calculated move, surgical in theory. The march to Concord was meant to be quiet, no battle, no martyrs, just a firm reminder of British power. Instead, it becomes the spark for war. When the smoke clears from Lexington and Concord, Gage's worst fear comes true. The countryside erupts. Militias swarm the roads. Thousands pour in from New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. In less than 2 weeks, 15,000 colonial soldiers surround Boston. Gage is trapped. His army holds the city, but nothing more. Every road is cut. Supplies are dwindling. The governor of Massachusetts has become the besieged. It didn't have to be this way. Months earlier, Gage had warned Parliament that the colonists were not bluffing, that resistance was real, that they were willing to fight. He asked for 20 yen reinforcements. He received less than half due. Now, he faces a nightmare scenario. Outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and out of time. His decision to march to Concord, what he thought would be a display of strength, has instead revealed weakness. And across the colonies, Gage's gamble becomes a symbol, not of power, but of imperial arrogance. The British Empire thought it could extinguish rebellion with one quick blow, but instead, it lit a fire it couldn't contain. Boston is a city under siege. By May 1775, it's surrounded on 3 sides by colonial militias. The only lifeline in or out is by sea, and even that grows thinner by the day. Inside the city, tension turns to terror. Civilians huddle in their homes, unsure what tomorrow will bring. Some cheer for the rebellion, others whisper loyalty to the crown. Most are just trying to survive. Food grows scarce, prices skyrocket, fear spreads. British soldiers patrol the streets, but their presence doesn't bring peace. It brings paranoia. Every knock at the door could be a raid. Every whispered rumor could be treason. Neighbors turn on neighbors. Families split. In some homes, one brother joins the militia while another signs up with the redcoats. Meanwhile, outside the city, the siege lines harden. Farmers become sentries. Young boys dig trenches. Church bells double as alarm signals. Even women and children carry powder, stitch bandages, and spy for intelligence. The divide between civilian and soldier blurs. Inside Boston, General Gage imposes curfews, seizes homes for officer quarters, and restricts public gatherings. The city that once buzzed with trade and life now crawls with fear. One night, ships arrive under darkness. Not food, but reinforcements. British soldiers, fresh from Ireland and England, file off the docks. Their arrival sends a message: the Empire isn't backing down. But neither are the Americans. The city has become a symbol of tyranny to some, of loyalty to others. It's no longer just a place, it's a powder keg. And as summer approaches, the spark to set it off will come from nearby hills. The hills above Boston, where blood will soon run in rivers. Long before Congress declares independence, a different war is already raging, in ink. From Boston to Charleston, printing presses thunder like cannons. Pamphlets, broadsides, handbills, they pour from tiny workshops onto every street corner, tavern wall, and church bulletin board. And their message is simple. Britain is not just ruling the colonies, it is enslaving them. Writers like Samuel Adams and John Dickinson pen fiery columns accusing Parliament of tyranny. Their words stir not just anger, but conviction. conviction that this fight is not about taxes but freedom. Then comes Thomas Paine. A failed corset maker from England, Paine arrives in Philadelphia with little money and fewer friends. But in January 1776, he publishes something that electrifies the colonies: Common Sense. It's not academic, it's not polite, it's blunt, radical, and plain-spoken. In it, Paine writes, "Even the distance at which the Almighty hath placed England and America is a strong and natural proof that the authority of one over the other was never the design of heaven." The pamphlet sells over 100,000 copies in a matter of months, unheard of in the 18th century. It spreads faster than any royal decree. From frontier cabins to seaport coffeehouses, people read and need to pass it on, copying it by hand if they have to. It doesn't just attack the king. It dismantles monarchy as an idea. The impact is seismic. Morale shifts. Ordinary farmers start to believe that independence isn't just possible, it's necessary. And while muskets and powder win battles, it is ideas that ignite revolutions. Britain has the world's finest army, but America, for the first time, has something else: a cause. The American colonists don't have a professional army. They have militias, local, part-time fighters, men who train on weekends, not battlefields. They come with their own weapons, their own clothes, and often their own rules. But they have one massive advantage: they're fighting at home. Most carry smoothbore muskets, inaccurate beyond 50 yards, slow to reload, prone to misfire, but these weapons are familiar, and in the tight woods and hills of New England, they're still deadly. Many also carry hunting rifles, more accurate at long distances, though slower to reload, perfect for sniping from tree lines and stone walls. The British, by contrast, are masters of traditional European warfare: disciplined ranks, volley fire, bayonet charges. In open fields, they dominate. But America is not Europe. The colonists don't line up politely. They ambush, they retreat, they strike from forests, swamps, barns, and church steeples. Guerrilla tactics, unorthodox, improvised, and infuriating. The redcoats mock them as bushwhackers and cowardly, but those same tactics bleed British columns dry, mile by mile. At Bunker Hill, the colonists dig earthworks overnight and fight from behind fortifications. British forces storm the hill in formation 3 times. They take the ground, yes, but lose over 1,000 men doing it. It's a brutal lesson. Winning ground doesn't mean winning the war. Meanwhile, the colonists begin to adapt. They scavenge weapons from battlefields. They build cannon foundries. They learn to fight like soldiers, not just militiamen. Washington knows that spirit alone won't win. He needs discipline. He needs logistics. He needs to turn a mob into an army. But for now, the British are learning something too. This won't be over quickly, and the colonies are more prepared, more committed than anyone in London imagined. By summer 1775, war has spread beyond Boston, and the terrain becomes its own kind of enemy. The British think in terms of maps, towns, roads, rivers, forts. But America doesn't fight like Europe. There are few paved roads. The colonies are vast, forested, and largely unmapped. What looks manageable on parchment turns into months of marching through mud, heat, snow, and wilderness. From the rocky coastlines of New England to the swamps of the Carolinas, every colony becomes contested ground. No front line, no safe zone. In the north, dense woods cloak rebel ambushes. In the south, disease stalks every army camp. Inland, rivers swell with rain, cutting off supply routes. Armies get lost. Orders arrive weeks late. Half the war is fought against the landscape itself. Distances that look short on paper, like from New York to Philadelphia, can take weeks to cover with troops, cannon, and wagons. And always, American militias watch from the shadows, striking supply lines, vanishing before a counterattack. Control is temporary. A town captured today may rebel tomorrow. For the British, even victory becomes fragile. They capture New York City in 1776, but can't hold the countryside. They march into Philadelphia in 1777, but are forced to abandon it by 1778. Nothing sticks, and geography fuels morale. Colonists realize they don't have to win every battle, they just have to survive. Force Britain to chase them. bleed them slowly. Washington calls it a war of posts, strategic retreats, carefully chosen ground, attacks at advantage. It's not glorious, it's exhausting, but it's working. And across the ocean, Britain begins to feel it. A war on foreign soil, without maps, without momentum, and the battlefield keeps growing. June 17th, 1775. Just outside of Boston, the hills are alive with gunfire and smoke. Colonial forces, tipped off about a British advance, work through the night building earthworks on Breed's Hill, not Bunker Hill, as history later misnames it. By morning, 1,000 men are dug in, ready to fight. From the harbor, British cannons begin to thunder. On land, General William Howe prepares 200 redcoats for a full assault. He doesn't expect stiff resistance. He expects to crush this rebellion in one clean stroke. He is wrong. As the British march up the hill, colonists wait silently behind makeshift walls. Ammunition is scarce. Captain Prescott gives the famous order, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." The British advance, bayonets fixed, coats gleaming. Then, a blast of musket fire tears through their lines. Dozens fall. They regroup and charge again. More gunfire, more bodies drop. A third assault, this time with bayonets, finally drives the colonists from the hill. The British take the ground, but the cost is staggering. Over 1,000 British soldiers are dead or wounded, nearly half the attacking force. Among the officers, losses are even higher. One general calls it a dear-bought victory. The Americans lose only around 400, but suffer a symbolic blow. The hill is lost. But something deeper is won. Confidence. The colonists had stood their ground against one of the world's best-trained armies and inflicted massive casualties. Word spreads fast. Across the colonies, spirits rise. Foreign observers take note. Even Britain begins to realize this isn't a rebellion, it's a war. And it will not be over soon. The Battle of Bunker Hill proves one thing beyond doubt. The Americans may lack experience, but they will fight, and they will bleed. The American Revolution is not just a military struggle, it's an economic nightmare. By late 1775, the Continental Congress has no power to tax, no stable currency, no central bank, yet it must somehow fund an army, feed it, clothe it, arm it, and keep it alive. The solution? Paper money. Congress prints Continentals, promissory notes backed by nothing. At first, people accept them out of patriotism, but within a year, inflation spirals, prices soar. By 1779, a continental dollar is worth less than a penny. Soldiers are paid in paper no one wants. Washington writes to Congress in despair, "We are at the end of our tether." His army is starving, barefoot, and unpaid. In the winter, troops march with rags around their feet, blood staining the snow. Gunpowder is scarce. Weapons are mismatched. Some regiments go weeks without meat. Desertion rates climb. Meanwhile, British forces are resupplied by sea, uniformed, paid, and fed from across the Atlantic. To many observers, the war looks hopelessly lopsided. But America's real supply line isn't a single road or fleet. It's its people. Patriot women sew uniforms and melt down pewter for bullets. Blacksmiths convert farm tools into weapons. Local militias raid British wagons. Entire communities ration food to keep soldiers alive. And then there's Robert Morris, a Philadelphia merchant who risks his personal fortune to fund the war effort. Without him, the revolution may have collapsed under its own weight. Still, the economic strain cuts deep. Riots erupt over food, merchants price gouge, even revolutionaries grow bitter. Without British trade, coastal towns wither. Farmers go unpaid for crops seized by the army. Freedom, it turns out, doesn't come cheap. And in the battle to stay solvent, America teeters on the edge of financial collapse. Across the Atlantic, another power watches with growing interest and growing patience. France. Still humiliated by its loss in the 7 Years' War, France is eager to see Britain suffer, but it's not ready to commit. Not yet. Not for a rebellion that might burn out in months. In Paris, diplomats whisper, courtiers debate, could these scrappy colonists actually win? The American cause needs more than sympathy. It needs ships, gunpowder, and gold. But France won't risk war with Britain without proof the rebels can survive. Enter Benjamin Franklin. At 70 years old, he arrives in France dressed like a humble farmer, fur hat and all. Behind the charm lies sharp strategy. Franklin understands the French court. He plays to their fantasies. America as a noble experiment, a brave stand against tyranny. And slowly, he builds a case. He secures secret shipments of muskets and powder. French ports quietly allow American ships to resupply. Spies pass information, but it's unofficial, covert, deniable. France waits for a turning point. That moment comes in October 1777 at a place called Saratoga. There, American forces led by General Horatio Gates capture an entire British army. It's a stunning victory, proof that the revolution isn't just alive, but potentially winnable. Paris erupts with celebration. Franklin seizes the moment. By early 1778, France formally recognizes American independence and declares war on Britain. What began as a colonial rebellion now becomes a global conflict. Spain will join a year later, the Netherlands too. Suddenly, Britain is fighting not just in America, but in Europe, the Caribbean, and beyond. The empire is stretched thin. Its dominance no longer feels inevitable. The revolution, once isolated, now has allies. And America, once alone, now stands with the power of a continent behind it. The battlefield is brutal, but for many, the true horror begins after the fighting ends. In 18th century America, medicine is primitive, germ theory is unknown, sanitation is an afterthought, and for wounded soldiers, survival is often a matter of luck, not treatment. A musket ball shatters bone, rips flesh. Surgeons, many with no formal training, have one option: amputation. No anesthesia, no sterilization, just a saw, a leather strap to bite down on, and a prayer. Infection kills more than bullets. Gangrene spreads fast. There are no antibiotics. Even a minor wound can turn fatal. The lucky ones wake up with missing limbs. The others don't wake at all. At makeshift field hospitals, barns, tents, church basements, blood coats the floors. The stench of rot and death hangs thick in the air. Groans echo through the night. And it's not just wounds. Disease is the real killer: smallpox, dysentery, typhoid. These invisible enemies sweep through camps like wildfire. At Valley Forge alone, more men die of disease than combat. Soldiers weaken from hunger and exposure. Blankets are few. Clean water, rarer still. Doctors do what they can. Some, like Dr. Benjamin Rush, push for better hygiene and record keeping. Others perform rudimentary inoculations against smallpox. Risky, but sometimes life-saving. Women step in as nurses, caregivers, even battlefield assistants. They clean wounds, carry water, and comfort the dying. Their work is rarely recorded, but it is vital. For many veterans, the trauma lasts long after the war ends. Phantom pains, crude prosthetics, scars, both visible and buried deep. There is no Veterans Administration, no pensions for most, only memories and silence. Yet despite the agony, they return to the ranks. Because the dream still burns, and they know the war is far from over. December 25th, 1776. The wind howls across the Delaware River. Ice floats in jagged sheets. Snow drives sideways. Most armies would wait for spring. Washington cannot. His army is crumbling. After months of retreat and defeat, morale is near collapse. Enlistments are expiring. Many soldiers are barefoot, hungry, and ready to go home. Congress is in hiding. The revolution is one loss away from death. So Washington gambles. That night, in silence and darkness, he leads 2,500 men across the frozen Delaware River. Rowboats jam with gear and men. Oars creak. Ice slams against the hulls. 2 detachments fail to cross entirely. But by morning, one column, soaked, shivering, reaches the Jersey shore. Their target, Trenton, where 100 Hessian mercenaries, German soldiers hired by Britain, sleep off their Christmas celebrations. At dawn, the Americans strike. The attack is swift and total. Cannon blast through town. Muskets crack through the haze. Caught completely off guard, the Hessians fall into chaos. Within 45 minutes, over 900 are captured. Not a single American is killed in battle. For the first time in months, Washington wins. And more than just the town, he wins back belief. A week later, he strikes again, at Princeton. Another victory, another burst of momentum. The effect ripples outward. Recruitment rises, spirits surge. The myth of British invincibility begins to crack. Even Congress breathes easier. It's a masterstroke, not for the ground it gains, but for the message it sends. The revolution isn't dead. Not yet. Washington's army still lives, still fights, still dares. And the world, watching from London to Paris, begins to wonder, could this fragile dream actually survive? The American Revolution is not just fought with muskets, it's waged in whispers. As armies clash in open fields, another war unfolds in secret, a shadow war of spies, codes, double agents, and hidden ink. Washington knows his army cannot outgun the British, but maybe, with the right intelligence, they can outthink them. Enter the Culper Ring, an undercover spy network, based in New York, the largest British-occupied city in the colonies. Formed in 1778 and run by Abraham Woodhull and Anna Strong, the ring uses everything from coded letters and invisible ink to laundry lines and hidden symbols to pass messages. British troop movements, supply lines, fleet arrivals, all flow back to Washington in careful dispatches, often smuggled by ordinary civilians. One member even hides notes in hollowed-out quill feathers. Deception becomes a weapon. Washington leaks false troop numbers to spook the enemy. He sends fake orders he knows will be intercepted. He hides real plans beneath layers of decoys. British commanders begin to doubt their intelligence. Misinformation spreads. Confidence erodes. Meanwhile, Benedict Arnold, once a hero of Saratoga, turns traitor. Bitter over slights and debts, he secretly agrees to hand over West Point, a key American fort, for money and a commission in the British Army. The plan nearly works, but an American patrol captures British Major John Andre, Arnold's contact, carrying incriminating documents. Andre is hanged. Arnold escapes. The betrayal shocks the colonies. Even inside the revolution, trust is fragile. Still, Washington doesn't panic. He doubles down, tightens the spy ring, adopts British methods, and improves them. Because in a war of uneven firepower, information levels the field. And as the snow blankets the land, it covers more than just footprints. It conceals secrets that will shape the outcome of the war. General William Howe should have ended the war. In 1776, he commands the largest British expeditionary force ever sent overseas. 32,000 men, a professional army, the best navy on earth. His orders are clear: crush the rebellion swiftly. And at first, it seems he might. Howe takes New York City after a series of hard-fought battles. Washington is outmaneuvered, outflanked, and forced into retreat. Thurs. A British win battle after battle. They hold the most strategic port in North America. American morale craters. But then, Howe hesitates. Rather than pursue Washington's battered army, he slows his campaign. Some say it's caution. Others say it's ego. Howe wants to end the war on his own terms, not by someone else's plan. That someone else is General John Burgoyne, leading a separate British force from Canada. The idea: Burgoyne moves south while Howe moves north. They meet in Albany, cut off New England, end the war. But Howe never moves north. Instead, he chooses to march on Philadelphia, the rebel capital. It's symbolic, but not strategic. He wins the city in 1777. But loses the bigger picture. Meanwhile, Burgoyne marches south and walks into a disaster. Surrounded by American forces at Saratoga, his army surrenders. It's one of the most decisive moments of the war, and it never should have happened. Back in London, outrage erupts. Howe's failure to support Burgoyne is seen as a blunder of historic proportions. The ministry questions his leadership. Parliament grows restless. Public support wanes. Howe resigns in 1778. Too late. Because by then, France has entered the war, and the British are no longer facing just rebellion. They're facing revolution, with global support, and a former colony that refuses to die. By 1777, Washington knows spirit alone won't win the war. Enthusiasm is not discipline, muskets are not formations, and America's army, though brave, is still rough around the edges, disorganized, inconsistent, and prone to collapse under pressure. Enter Baron Friedrich von Steuben. A former Prussian officer with a flair for the dramatic, von Steuben arrives at Valley Forge during the Army's darkest winter. He speaks little English, but what he lacks in language, he makes up for in command presence. He begins drilling the troops, rigorously, relentlessly. Line by line, he teaches the basics: how to load faster, aim better, maneuver as one. He writes a training manual from scratch, later known as the Blue Book, that becomes the foundation of the American military. His methods are bold. He swears in multiple languages. He rewrites instructions phonetically for his interpreters. He turns chaos into cohesion. The change is swift and stunning. Soldiers who once scattered under fire now hold their ground. Bayonet drills replace blind charges. Artillery crews learn timing and coordination. Officers are trained in command structure. Washington watches it happen. His ragged army is becoming a real force. And it's not just training. European tactics begin to shape American strategies. French engineers help construct better fortifications. Spanish gunpowder flows through secret supply chains. Dutch traders help skirt the British blockade. The revolution starts to look less like rebellion and more like an organized fight for nationhood. At Monmouth in 1778, the proof comes. In brutal heat, American troops stand their ground against the British in open battle, a feat they couldn't have managed just a year earlier. The pivot is real. The army that once ran now marches. And for the first time, it looks like they might not just survive this war, they might win it. When France joins the war in 1778, everything changes. What began as a colonial uprising has now become an international conflict, and the British Empire, once unchallenged, is suddenly fighting a global war. The alliance is formalized in Paris. The Treaty of Alliance guarantees that France will recognize American independence and defend it militarily. In return, the United States agrees not to make peace with Britain without French consent. The man who made it happen? Benjamin Franklin. After years of charm, negotiation, and masterful diplomacy, Franklin finally delivers what the revolution desperately needs. Not just supplies, but ships, troops, and recognition. French ports open to American vessels. French generals, most famously Marquis de Lafayette, just 19 years old, sail across the Atlantic to join the fight. French engineers assist with fortifications. French money pays American debts. And most important of all, the French Navy enters the war. This is Britain's worst nightmare. For decades, it had relied on naval dominance to control trade routes, supply lines, and colonies. Now, the Royal Navy faces a peer, and in many places, a superior force. French ships raid British holdings in the Caribbean. Skirmishes erupt in India. Spain joins in 1779. The Netherlands soon after. What began in Boston now ripples through 5 continents. British generals in America grow nervous. Reinforcements are delayed. Supplies thin. Troops are redirected elsewhere. And suddenly, America is no longer alone. France didn't join out of sympathy. It joined out of strategy, but the effect is the same. The revolution has teeth. The rebels now have allies. And Britain, overstretched and overconfident, begins to feel the pressure. From Paris to Philadelphia, one truth becomes clear. This is no longer just a rebellion. It's a world war. October 1781, Yorktown, Virginia, a sleepy tobacco port, now transformed into the most important battlefield in the world. British General Charles Cornwallis has dug in, expecting rescue by sea. But the sea is no longer British. French Admiral de Grasse has sealed off the Chesapeake Bay. On land, Washington marches south, coordinated with Rochambeau's French forces. Nearly 17,000 troops surround the British on all sides. Inside the British trenches, it's misery. Bombardment begins. American and French artillery pound Yorktown night and day. Earth shakes, buildings splinter, fires rage. Cornwallis writes, "Nothing but the interposition of Providence can save us." For the Allied forces, it's their most unified moment. America, and engineers dig trenches. French officers lead charges. Even enslaved men, offered freedom for their service, carry supplies and dig fortifications. The final push comes on the night of October 14th. Under cover of darkness, American troops storm Redoubt 10, a key British fortification. Bayonets only, no musket fire. They move fast, scaling walls, wrestling through smoke and screams. In 30 minutes, it's taken. Cornwallis is cornered. No reinforcements, no escape. On October 19th, he surrenders. Over 7,000 British troops lay down their arms. Drums play a tune known as "The World Turned Upside Down." Washington doesn't attend the ceremony. He sends his second-in-command, just as Cornwallis sends his. The war is ending, not with handshakes, but with cold formality. The British banners fall, cheers erupt. But among the victors, exhaustion sets in. The fields are littered with the wounded. The trenches reek of blood and rot. Yorktown is a moment of triumph, but also of trauma. And though the fighting is nearly over, the hardest part still lies ahead. Becoming a nation worth the price they paid. Yorktown may have ended the fighting, but it didn't solve the crisis. The United States, victorious on paper, is economically shattered. Its currency, the Continental dollar, is worthless. Inflation has wiped out savings. Trade has collapsed. Ports were blockaded for years. Farms were burned, towns ransacked, and merchants ruined. The new nation is deep in debt, to France, to Spain, to private lenders, even to its own soldiers. Congress, which still has no power to tax, can only beg the states for funds. Most refuse or delay. Even basic government operations are held together with borrowed money and IOUs. Meanwhile, thousands of veterans return home unpaid. Promised back wages, they receive nothing but certificates, worth less than the paper they're printed on. In 1783, in Pennsylvania, a group of angry soldiers surrounds the building where Congress is meeting. Their message is clear: pay us, or else. The Congress flees the city. It's not just a financial crisis, it's an existential one. Without a central treasury, how do you govern? Without pay, how do you keep an army? Without economic stability, how do you build a republic? Enter Robert Morris again. The financier of the revolution becomes superintendent of finance, trying to patch the leaking ship. He advocates for a national bank, tax reforms, a stronger central authority. But the cracks are everywhere. In the South, plantations are ruined. In New England, merchants can't compete with British goods flooding back in. In the frontier, settlers trade in whiskey and hides, not dollars. The war has been won, but the country is broken, and on the brink of chaos. Independence brought freedom. Now it demands something even harder: responsibility. The guns fall silent, but the war doesn't end in the minds or bodies of those who fought it. For the veterans of the revolution, peace brings a different kind of struggle to survive the country they helped create. Tens of thousands return home maimed, sick, or hollowed by what they've seen. Some have missing limbs, others carry lead in their bodies for life. Most carry wounds no doctor can see. There is no Veterans Administration, no permanent hospitals, no psychological care. For most, there isn't even land or back pay, just promises unfulfilled. George Washington pleads with Congress to honor the Army. But funds are scarce. Debts pile up. Many soldiers sell their war bonds for pennies to survive. Others turn to begging. Some drink, some disappear. The scars run deeper than injury. Men who once stood shoulder to shoulder now return to farms and foreclosure. Cities don't welcome them with parades, but with silence. The revolution, it seems, is already forgetting its soldiers, and the trauma extends beyond the battlefield. Wives and families spent years alone, fending for themselves. Widows of the fallen receive little, if any, support. Former slaves who fought for both sides, often promised freedom, are abandoned, re-enslaved, or exiled. The emotional cost echoes in journals, letters, and memories. Dreams of glory gave way to nightmares, of smoke, blood, amputations, screams. And yet, somehow, the nation holds. Veterans form societies. They gather in taverns. They tell stories. They try to make meaning from the suffering. And in doing so, they lay the emotional bedrock of a country still learning how to be whole. Because before America became an idea, it was a sacrifice. And long after the treaties were signed, the pain endured. Not every American wanted independence. During the war, as many as 1 in 5 colonists remained loyal to the British Crown, some out of principle, some out of fear, some out of faith that order was better than chaos. They were merchants, farmers, clergy, former soldiers, men and women who had chosen the losing side. And now they're the enemy in their own country. With the Treaty of Paris signed and independence secured, the patriots turn inward, to vengeance. Across the colonies, loyalist homes are seized, businesses looted, properties auctioned off. Some are tarred and feathered. Others are publicly humiliated, beaten, or driven from their towns. Even families of loyalists, wives, children, elderly parents, are cast out. In New York, thousands of loyalists, many once influential, flee as American flags are raised. They board ships for Britain or for Canada, where they begin again in exile. In the South, it's even worse. The war there was civil war in miniature, neighbor against neighbor. Now, with British protection gone, score settling becomes survival. Militia bands hunt form. Loyalist fighters. Settlements burn. Courts rarely intervene. Some loyalists sue for compensation. Few succeed. Even African Americans who fought for the British, promised freedom in return, find themselves betrayed. Many are recaptured and enslaved once more. Others are relocated to Nova Scotia or Sierra Leone, caught between broken promises and bitter futures. The new nation is eager to forget them. But their absence is a scar, a reminder that independence came with cleansing, exile, and silence. History will call it a revolution. But for the Loyalists, it was something else entirely. Loss. The war is over. On paper, the United States has won. 13 colonies, now 13 states, stand free. No longer subjects, now citizens. But the real question begins to loom. What kind of nation has been created? The answer isn't simple. The cost of victory is enormous. 25,000 Americans dead, nearly 1% of the colonial population. Tens of thousands more wounded, displaced, or impoverished. Cities like Charleston, New York, and Savannah are devastated. Farmlands are scorched. Port economies have collapsed. A whole generation bears the scars of war. Physical, emotional, spiritual. The heroes are uncertain. Washington resigns his command in December 1783, refusing kingship or lifelong rule. His farewell shocks Europe. Monarchs and generals don't give up power willingly, but he does. Because this wasn't about creating a new crown, it was about creating something untried. But unity frays almost immediately. The states bicker, debts go unpaid. The Articles of Confederation, meant to bind the new nation, barely function. Congress is weak, law is scattered. Armed uprisings like Shays' Rebellion rattle nerves. Some whisper that maybe democracy itself was a mistake. The memory of the war is messy. It lives on in graveyards, in debt ledgers, in burned-out towns, in bitter silences. Yet it also lives in stories, told around hearths and passed through generations. The war becomes legend. But behind the legend is something fragile, something human. This was not a perfect victory. It was not a clean birth. It was a hard, painful, uncertain forging. But it was real, and in the struggle, something enduring was formed. Not just a nation, but an identity. One that had bled for its beliefs. One that would now have to live up to them. It began as a protest, against taxes, against parliament, against decisions made across an ocean. But by the time the final musket cracked, it had become something larger. The American Revolution was not just a war of separation. It was a war of transformation. It did not simply end British rule. It forced a new people to ask, what do we believe? What are we willing to endure for those beliefs? And what binds us when everything else falls apart? There was no roadmap, no precedent, only an experiment. And experiments are messy. The revolution left behind wreckage, economic collapse, political instability, personal loss. It left thousands dead and thousands more forgotten. It failed to deliver on many of its promises. Enslaved people remained in chains, women remained disenfranchised, and native nations, many of whom had allied with the British, were left devastated, their lands open to relentless expansion. Yet even amid those failures, something world-altering took root. A belief that government could be built not on ancestry, but on principle. That power, instead of being handed down from kings, could rise up from the governed. It was not perfect. It was never perfect. But it was new, and it inspired revolutions across the globe. In France, Haiti, Latin America, it changed how people thought about rights, citizenship, and freedom. The war had forged something more than independence. It had forged Americans, men and women who no longer saw themselves as Virginians or New Yorkers or Carolinians, but as part of a shared, fragile, ambitious union. That idea would be tested again and again, in civil wars, in depressions, in marches and courtrooms, but it would endure. The Constitution would follow, the presidency, the Bill of Rights, none of them inevitable, all of them born from the crucible of the war. And though the United States would stumble, it would keep walking forward, haunted by its flaws, but pulled by its ideals. Because this war, this first, improbable war, was not just about winning territory or expelling a tyrant. It was about proving something radical, that ordinary people, from scattered farms and backwoods taverns, could stand up to empire, that they could build something enduring not from bloodlines, but from belief, and that sometimes, against all odds, the world really could turn upside down. 1 in 50 Americans died, families split, cities burned. The revolution asked everything, and offered no guarantees in return. Freedom is never free. Unity is not natural. It must be chosen. A nation, like an army, must be trained, tested, and tempered. Every civic debate, every election, every protest still pulses with the echoes of 1776. We are the inheritors of the gamble they made. Out of fire, they forged not perfection, but possibility. And that was enough to begin.